All right, hello guys. We are going to be talking about introduction paragraphs and what makes a strong hook, a good transition, and just sets you up well for the rest of your paragraph. So, before we get started, I want you guys to think about your own life. When you are most interested in a show or a movie, is it something that grabs your eye in the trailer? Is it a line that's said? Is it an actor or an actress that's in it? Think about the conversations that you've been most gripped by, where you're kind of sitting on the edge of your seat, or you just can't wait for your friend or your parent to continue the rest of the story. Or because I like applying it to school, think about a lesson by a teacher that's really just made you want to learn or made you actually want to pay attention. Because we all know that there are times when we're like, Psh, could care less about this, and we zone out. So I just want you to think about that. What naturally grabs your interest and wants to make you continue listening? Um, or, in other words, what makes you not want to zone out, right? Um, this is what we need to be thinking about when we go into writing an introduction paragraph. Remember, your teachers, me in this particular instance, your teachers have and are going to be reading 169 essays, which are a lot of essays. And they may have different thesis statements and different kind of styles of writing, but for the most part, it's covering the same material. So how as a writer can you stand out? How can you be unique and academic, but make your teacher perk up and be like, "Oh, I haven't I haven't seen this before. Oh, this is really unique." And then excited to actually stick to the rest of the essay that you've written. So there's a reason that the very beginning of the introduction paragraph is called a hook. Essentially, you are the fisherman, and the teacher or the reader is the fish. So you need to put bait, worms, flies, whatever you're fishing for. You need to put bait on that hook so that your reader will bite and then be dragged and pulled along with it. Okay, so do not underestimate the power of the hook. A fisherman cannot fish without hook and bait. Again, you are the fisherman, the reader is the fish, and you want to give them bait to trap. Okay? What determines a great hook? There are a couple of things. It's unique and it offers something new, or it puts an old concept in a new way. So, again, it's not the same boring hook, the same quote, the same statistics, the cliche, statement. It's not the same thing that everyone else is using. It is unique and it's a unique perspective on something as old as love. It relates to the reader. Again, I think the things that we are most interested in when we're watching a TV show or we're listening to a song or we're listening to a conversation is normally it's okay. It deals with something that we already like or it has some sort of application to us. Um, I know that when I'm proctoring the SAT, I am reading the most boring booklet ever created, ever, to all of these students who are taking the SAT, but they are hooked, right? Because they know that these rules can make or break their SAT score. So, how can we get your hook to be relatable and important to the reader, to offer the reader something? And then finally, it allows a seamless transition or a seamless opening or image that deals with the concept of your essay. So, what's stated in your thesis statement. So, if you're writing an essay about true love or fate versus free will, then you want to make sure that your hook has something along the lines of fate and free will. You don't want to end up talking about, McDonald's or violence, unless you have a very unique way of making that actually apply to fate or free will or love. Okay, so those are kind of the three things that determine a great hook. Oh, also, just as a side point, it's not random, right? Again, it needs to have some sort of application to the overall idea of what you're talking about. So there are a couple of different hooks. Some are better than others. And you don't have to just use one of these. You can actually kind of take a couple and combine them for something that is unique. So we're going to go through some of these hooks real quick. The quote, which we have, learned probably since middle school. So again, it's like, how do you make this unique? How do you do this in a different way that isn't going to be like the cliched middle school opening. The analogy or the story, the statistics, the creative image, almost like you're writing a novel, or this is like an introduction to a novel, and then references to pop culture and news. So we're gonna go hook by hook and just talk about what works. Okay. So the first one is the quote. So this is starting your introduction with the words of somebody else. If you remember pathos, ethos, and logos, this is dealing with the ethos thing. You are appealing to a higher power, somebody else who is has more name recognition than you do. Um, the quote and or the person that you are quoting should apply to the overall point you're trying to make or argue throughout your essay. So if you're going to use the I have a dream quote, which so many students use, then you need to make sure that your essay probably deals with race, the content of people's character instead of the color of their skin, or Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movement, or not judging somebody based upon their physical attributes, right? It has to apply. So here is an example of a good hook with the quote. And notice this quote isn't just dropped in there and then automatically go to the thesis statement. If you are going to be using a quote, you have to explain your quote. So I am going to move my screen real quick. Okay. An influential leader once wrote in his magnum opus, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." Though this was written 80 years ago, this sentiment still exists today. It is seen all over social media and all over education. The opinions of an adult are formulated in their youth by those who have the most influence over them, those who they let into their circle, social media, and those whom they learn under, their teachers and their parents. Adolf Hitler, the author of this quote, knew that well. So again, I have this quote at the beginning. I've got a little bit of a lead in without telling you who the author is, and I explain the quote. I take a couple sentences to explain, okay, what does "he alone who owns the youth gains the future" mean? Um, and then it's kind of like I leave the author of this quote for the end for shock value, because who's going to quote Adolf Hitler in the beginning of their essay, right? But this is left for shock value. You have this interesting quote. You've got why this quote is applicable, and it's like, oh, by the way, this is probably from one of the most evil dictators ever known to man, right? And so automatically you've got interest there. You're like, well, why are we talking about essentially brainwashing the youth? And why are we talking about Adolf Hitler in here? So already I'm totally hooked, right? So that's the quote. There's the analogy, which is also a metaphor or simile, but it's a comparison of two things used for explaining a larger concept or an idea. So this is almost a rhetorical situation. So take a look. If students were left alone on the first day of school in a classroom with no teacher or adult, chaos would ensue. So I'm setting up a story, right? This is a situation that could happen to us. If they were then left for weeks upon end with no teacher, a student leader would rise to bring about a form of organization to said chaos. This would then form a pseudo-government with rules and principles established. Or, at least, this is the theory of Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, and William Golding's novel, Lord of the Flies. In a world destined for chaos, structure must be had. So again, rhetorical situation. Kids without a classroom, what would happen? What is the natural form? And then I'm connecting it to what I'm assumingly going to be talking about in my essay, which is Thomas Paine's Common Sense and William Golding's novel, The Lord of the Flies, because both of them deal with no structure, no government, people in chaos, and then a government rising. So again, it's a story. I'm setting up a situation that hopefully allows the reader in on my thought process and what the essay is going to be like. The second is the statistics. Now you have to be careful with this, because if you're going to use statistics, they have to be valid. You cannot just make them up. You could start your own statistics and do your own polling, if you're talking about something that deals with high school students or a specific English or math class. But overall, they need to be valid, okay? So say we're talking about the American dream, right? You can start up with information. In a 2019 Gallup poll, which is a valid polling source for America and people in general, Americans were surveyed from across the country and asked if they believed in the American dream, if the American dream was achievable. 70% of them said with confidence that it is. a 25% increase from years earlier when the poll was last taken. Interestingly enough, the most serious doubters of this are women aged between 18 and 40. And then I would probably continue. Why is that? Why are women the most cynical when it comes to believing in the American dream? So then I would ask those questions and I would talk about, well, F. Scott Fitzgerald in his novel, The Great Gatsby, seems to counter 70% of the current American population. In his novel, he argues that the American dream, though it is a glorious goal to have, will actually lead to one's own demise. So you see how something like that can easily transition into a topic about the American dream or America in general. Then we've got the creative intro. This is for you creative writers out there who really like description. This creative intro uses sensory imagery to paint a picture for the reader and then connects that image to an overall topic of discussion for the essay. This is something that we looked at last semester when we were talking about the Declaration of Independence, but notice the descriptive imagery here. A concerned face with a furrowed brow looks out, and his gnarled white hand with its finger pointed calls the viewer to attention. I want you, the man says, bedecked in his star-spangled suit that bursts from the pale ochre page. Since April 16, 1917, Americans have gotten to know their patriotic Uncle Sam, whose figure was printed 4 million times and posted around the nation in order to recruit citizens to the war effort for the Great War. Uncle Sam is one of the most famous pieces of American propaganda to date, and his serious face encourages the viewer of their moral responsibility to aid their nation. Now notice, the first two sentences are full of sensory imagery: concerned face, furrowed brow, gnarled white hands, bedecked in his star-spangled suit that bursts from the page. There's lots of active verbs there. And then I take this creative image and I combine it with fact, historical fact, which is also interesting, right? Since April 16th, 1917, so this is when it was first used, Americans have gotten to know their patriotic Uncle Sam. And then I clue in, oh, this is that interesting person that I am describing. So you can see how you're baiting your reader. It's, okay, so I'm describing something. Who is this person? And then I get a little bit of historical information. I reveal the person, and then I talk about why is this person significant. Again, notice none of these hooks so far have only been one sentence or two sentences. Your hooks require a little bit of explanation, okay? It's not like a hit and run where it's just like, oh, here you go, and now I'm going to move on. You have to explain its relevance. And then finally, references to pop culture and news. So you're retelling a fictional story or referring to a fictional story, gossip, or real stories that tie into your overall idea. So this one ties into this idea of love. Romance, adultery, divorce, children are splashed upon the pages of People and Us magazine, on tabloids, gossip columns, and social media sites. Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth are married and divorced. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry slam the royal family. It's the Taylor Swift songs played on the radio as boys and girls cry their hearts out because she just gets it. It's the movies watched over tubs of ice cream by piles of snot-filled tissues. It's the ups and downs of love humanity simultaneously longs for and wishes they'd never encountered. Now that's a hook, right? Because I am relating to something that most people know about: romance, adultery, Us magazine. I'm relating to figures of pop culture that the majority of people would probably know, and then how it deals with what eventually I'm getting to, which is this idea of love, right? It's the ups and downs of love humanity simultaneously longs for and wishes they'd never encountered. So now that we've reviewed hooks, let's just talk about the introduction paragraph structure. Your hook, as we know, comes first. And again, it's not a sentence, it's not two sentences, it's something that takes a little bit of time to develop. Then you need to seamlessly transition into applying that hook and applying that image, which is about 1 to 2 sentences, and then your thesis statement. Notice that your thesis statement is at this point of the triangle. So it's this broad idea that's slowly coming to a point. And you could view it as the thesis is literally the point of the entire essay. So let's take an introduction paragraph example. I'm using the last hook that we used, which was a reference to pop culture or the news. So I'm not going to reread this, but this is what I just read. I'll probably read the last 2 lines and show you how it transitions clearly. So starting with this: It's the movies watched over tubs of ice cream by piles of snot-filled tissues, reminding dumped individuals that hope is out there. It's the ups and downs of love that humanity simultaneously longs for and wishes they'd never encountered. Almost every source of media seems to affirm the drama involved with love and questions whether or not the risk is worth it. So, see how I'm starting to transition, right? This is something that applies to everyone. This question, though, it seems modern, isn't foreign to history, but is talked about in books that predate gossip columns and social media. So, again, hey, this is a general question, but guess what? This isn't just something that's today. It's not just modern, but it's something that predates that. Jazz age author, so it says it applies to history. Oh, and here's an example. Jazz age author and romantic F. Scott Fitzgerald personally struggled with his own love life and even put some of those struggles into his most famous novel. So now I have taken this general concept, tabloid magazines, Miley Cyrus, Meghan Markle, tubs of ice cream, and movies, and I have tied it into, hey, but these struggles that we have today are no different than what F. Scott Fitzgerald went through. And then finally, I bring it down to, this is my point. In his novel, The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald wrestles with whether true sacrificial love can exist romantically or just through the love of friends, as seen most clearly through Jay Gatsby's relationship with Daisy Buchanan and Nick Carraway. So notice, none of these except for my thesis statement are one sentence. My hook is a couple of sentences, my transition is a couple of sentences, but it's a well-developed, captivating paragraph that makes me want to see, okay, well, how does Fitzgerald play with this kind of tortured love idea? So final reminders, use an engaging hook. Make sure the hook is going to be relevant to the overall idea. Make sure you explain the hook. Use a few sentences to transition to the thesis statement. And the thesis statement should be the last, I repeat, last sentence of your introduction paragraph. And with that, you guys, good luck.